Anatomy and physiology. The organs and structures of the respiratory system are responsible for the exchange of the respiratory gases oxygen and carbon dioxide. Oxygen, essential for life, is delivered to all cells of the body in exchange for carbon dioxide, a waste product. The cardiovascular system assists in this vital function by providing blood vessels, the pathways for transporting these gases. Failure of or deficiency in either system has the same effect on the body: disruption of homeostasis and oxygen starvation in tissues that may result in death. The lungs and airways bring in fresh, oxygen-enriched air and expel waste carbon dioxide by a process called breathing, or ventilation. Breathing is an important method of regulating the pH of the blood, thereby maintaining homeostasis. Upper respiratory tract. The breathing process begins with inhalation. See Figure 7-1. Air is drawn into the 1. Nasal cavity, a chamber lined with mucous membranes and tiny hairs called cilia. Here, air is filtered, heated, and moistened to prepare it for its journey to the lungs. The nasal cavity is divided into a right and left side by a vertical partition of cartilage called the nasal septum. The receptors for the sense of smell are located in the nasal cavity. These receptors, called the olfactory neurons, are found among the epithelial cells lining the nasal tract and are covered with a layer of mucus. Because these receptors are located higher in the nasal passage than air normally inhaled during breathing, a person must sniff or inhale deeply to identify weak odors. Air passes from the nasal cavity to a muscular tube called the pharynx, or throat, that serves as a passageway for food and air. It consists of 3 sections: the 2. Nasopharynx, posterior to the nose; the 3. Oropharynx, posterior to the mouth; and the 4. Laryngopharynx, superior to the larynx. Within the nasopharynx is a collection of lymphatic tissue known as 5. Adenoids, or pharyngeal tonsils. The 6. Palatine tonsils, more commonly known as tonsils, are located in the oropharynx. They protect the opening to the respiratory tract from microscopic organisms that may attempt entry by this route. The 7. Larynx, voice box, contains the structures that make vocal sounds possible. A leaf-shaped structure on top of the larynx, the 8. Epiglottis, seals off the air passage to the lungs during swallowing. This function ensures that food or liquids do not obstruct the flow of air to the lungs. The larynx is a short passage that joins the pharynx with the 9. Trachea, windpipe. The trachea is composed of smooth muscle embedded with C-shaped rings of cartilage, which provide rigidity to keep the air passage open. Lower respiratory tract. The trachea divides into 2 branches called 10 bronchi, singular, bronchus. One branch leads to the 11 right lung and the other to the 12 left lung. The inner walls of the trachea and bronchi are composed of a mucous membrane embedded with cilia. This membrane traps incoming particles, and the cilia move the entrapped material upward into the pharynx, where it is coughed out, sneezed out, or swallowed. Like the trachea, bronchi contain C-shaped rings of cartilage. Each bronchus divides into smaller and smaller branches, eventually forming 13 bronchioles. Where bronchioles terminate, tiny air sacs called 14 alveoli, singular, alveolus, are formed. An alveolus resembles a small balloon because it expands and contracts with inflow and outflow of air. The 15 pulmonary capillaries lie adjacent to the thin tissue membranes of the alveoli. Carbon dioxide diffuses from the blood within the pulmonary capillaries and enters the alveolar spaces. Simultaneously, oxygen from the alveoli diffuses into the blood. After the exchange of gases, freshly oxygenated blood returns to the heart. It is now ready for delivery to all body tissues. The lungs are divided into lobes, 3 lobes in the right lung and 2 lobes in the left lung. The space between the right and left lungs, called the 16 mediastinum, contains the heart, aorta, esophagus, and bronchi. A serous membrane, the pleura, envelops the lobes of the lungs and folds over to line the walls of the thoracic cavity. The innermost membrane lying next to the lung is the 17 visceral pleura. The outermost membrane, which lines the thoracic cavity, is the 18 parietal pleura. Between these two membranes is the 19 pleural cavity. It contains a small amount of lubricating fluid, which permits the visceral pleura to glide smoothly over the parietal pleura during breathing. Ventilation depends on a pressure differential between the atmosphere and chest cavity. A large muscular partition, the 20 diaphragm, lies between the chest and abdominal cavities. The diaphragm assists in changing the volume of the thoracic cavity to produce the needed pressure differential for ventilation. When the diaphragm contracts, it partially descends into the abdominal cavity, thus decreasing the pressure within the chest and drawing air into the lungs. When the diaphragm relaxes, it slowly re-enters the thoracic cavity, thus increasing the pressure within the chest. Inspiration. As the pressure increases, air leaves the lungs. Expiration. The intercostal muscles assist the diaphragm in changing the volume of the thoracic cavity by elevating and lowering the rib cage. See Figure 7-2. Respiration. Respiration is the overall process by which oxygen is taken from air and transported to body cells for the metabolic process, while carbon dioxide and water, the waste products generated by these cells, are returned to the environment. Respiration includes 4 separate processes: 1. Ventilation, breathing, the largely involuntary movement of air into inspiration and out of expiration, the lungs in response to changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide levels in the blood and nervous stimulation of the diaphragm and intercostal muscles. 2. External respiration, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between the alveoli and the blood in the pulmonary capillaries. 3. Transport of respiratory gases through the body by blood in the cardiovascular system. 4. Internal respiration, the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide between tissue cells and the blood in systemic capillaries.